Hey guys, welcome to the long-awaited Blender rigid body car tutorial, and today we're gonna make a rigid body car. It's quite obvious if you ask. Let's start by adding a cube, which is gonna be our main axle. I'm starting with the axle because the body and stuff is quite irrelevant as of now. We're gonna add all of that later. Okay, so once you've added the main axle, go to the physics tab, add rigid body, and keep it at active. Turn 1 kg up to 2 kg, and change it from convex hull to box. I put it in box because I think it optimizes the performance a little more, because otherwise it's gonna have to check the sort of geometry for guidance. Now we add another cube. It's already going to be at the center of the axle, so we don't really have to worry. And snap onto the y-axis and move it along the x-axis. So that looks about right. Where it is quite irrelevant at this point. So yeah, it's not really that important. Just keep it next to it. That's the least I can say. Go into edit mode with tab and press I to inset the phase. Press E to extrude. Turn it into something that looks like this. This is going to be the steering connector sort of thing. Tab out of edit mode and set origin to geometry. Well, setting origin to geometry is really important because it helps calculate the center of gravity and stuff and whatnot in the rigid body settings. Leave it at 1 kilograms or 1 kg, whatever, and press Shift D, which duplicates it. Press N, and you should see this menu pop up. Okay, so move the cursor to in between the minus and whatever number is there, and get rid of the minus and press Enter. This would move it to the opposite side, exactly to the opposite side. How convenient, isn't it? Get that. Okay, now go to the z-axis, snap to the z-axis, z-view, whatever, and press Shift D and drag it on the y-axis. And press S and Shift X, which sizes it down on every axis except the x-axis. Now size it up on the x-axis. So basically now we have to add the constraints because we are done with the front steering and axle system. This is where the wheel is going to be connecting to these two thingies. Press tab to go into edit mode and select this face right here, the one on the side, and press Shift S2. Once you press Shift S2, the cursor should stamp to there, the 3D cursor, and press Shift A and add an empty. It's your choice what empty you want to add, but personally for this sort of section I prefer the arrow. Now add a generic constraint, which is sort of like a hinge, but you can control whatever direction it should be able to go in. If you scroll down, you should see the objects option. In the first object, select the main axle, and for the second object, select our steering connector thingy. And now scroll up, enable the X and the Y so that the Z angle is the only thing it can move in. Enable everything else, and a lot of people make this mistake, but just copy paste 0 to every one of them. It doesn't matter if the Z angle turns 0 too. A little bit of an explanation, host node, whatever. Basically, if you enable this is a limit. Leave the Z angle unchecked so that it doesn't limit the Z angle rotation. Okay, now that we're done that, that's about completely set. So now we should add a floor plane, size it up, press Shift S1 to return the cursor to the center, and press Shift S8 to return the object to the cursor. I know this sounds very confusing, but you'll get used to Blender anyways, if you're not used to Blender yet. I would like to remind you that people of any experience in Blender can do this if they just follow along. Just need to use a lot of brain power, you know what I mean? Okay. So change the floor plane from active to passive and press play. Now it should all fall down like that, in the literal sense, not the metaphorical sense. Okay, press Shift D on the constraint and do the same thing we did for the steering control thingies and make it go to the opposite side. It should be aligned to the face of the other steering control thingy. And what we have to do now is change the second object from the whatever that cube 001 to cube 002. It might be a different order, but just select this thing. Okay, now we have to duplicate these, but this time we're just gonna move it to the side. So go into edit mode on the steering arm. Okay, go to edit mode on the steering arm connector thing, and select the side face. Then press Shift S2, which snaps the cursor there, and select the duplicated constraint and press Shift S8. Now again, we have to delete both of these and select the first, and then the first object is gonna be, the steering connector, and the second object is gonna be the control arm. Once we have done that, we have to duplicate this and do that other thing again, except we're gonna add a minus at the start, so that goes to the other side, and we have to repeat the process. Okay, once we've done that, it should act as a single unit now. Let's ignore that for now. We'll come back to that later. If it should work when we are done with the entire suspension system, but right now just ignore it. Now we should duplicate this axle and move it along the y-axis to about the wheelbase of your car. Whatever, the wheelbase is completely your choice. Okay, so now we have, I'm gonna put it at this wheelbase because why not? It's gonna be a pretty long car, so. Okay, once we've done that, now the axle, make sure the axle is the size of the entire front steering system, because the wheels are gonna be attached at the end of the steering system, not the axle. I hope that makes sense. I hope if you've been able to follow along this far, then I'm just gonna assume this is gonna be very easy for you. It's really that simple. All you need is just a little bit of patience, and so now we have to add the body of the car. We're gonna size it up on basically every axis, but like be careful to do it right. And we're gonna go into edit mode. I prefer using edit mode. What? Okay, I prefer using edit mode because it gives me control over like everything. Okay, so here it is. This is like the entire body of the car. Then that's about it. This is the end of the tutorial. Just kidding. Like and subscribe and stuff, you know. Okay, so now let's add the wheel wells, which is like, you know, the hole for the wheels. Add a cylinder and we size it up. Size it along the x-axis as well, not that much. Press S, Shift X for this one because it sizes it down on every axis except the x-axis, which makes sense, you know. Scale it up to the size of about what you want the wheel to be. So I want the wheel to be like that because I want it to be a ginormous car. And then move the cylinder up so that it's about halfway into the car. Select the car, go to the modifiers tab, add a boolean modifier, and select the cylinder, and that's about it. You have wheel wells. But one more thing, you gotta select the cylinder again, press Shift D, just move it along the y-axis, keep it there, select the back axle, press Shift S2, and take the cylinder and press Shift S, no, what have I done? Select the cylinder and press Shift S8. We have to copy the Z location of the original wheel well mold, and then we have to select the car body again, add another boolean modifier, and this time select the back mold, and apply both of them, and that's about it. Now we have wheel wells in the right place. So now that we have the wheel wells, let's add the actual wheels. Actually, screw that. No, let's not add the actual wheels. Select the front axle, the main axle, not the steering arm. Press Shift S2 and press Shift A, add an empty. This time I'm going to add an arrows, the arrows one. Move the car body up because you're gonna need some clearance on that thing. Not that high. It's about this guy. This high. Okay, so now that we have added the constraint for the suspension, yes, this is the constraint for the suspension. We're gonna click rigid body constraint, and this is the scary stuff. Generic spring. I say scary stuff because it takes a ton of tweaking to actually come up with a reliable suspension system for your car. Select the suspension constraint and set all of these to 0 as usual. So for the first object, select our car and then select the axes. So now that we've done that, we have the actual suspension. No, we don't have the suspension system. Okay, so now we have the suspension constraint. Once you set all of these to 0, disable the X and the Z angle and disable the X and the Y axes. If you enable one of these, it basically disables movement on that certain axis or angle. So if you enable these two, that means it's not going to be able to move on the x-axis or the y-axis. It's just going to be able to move on the z-axis and turn along the y-axis, which is exactly what we want, because suspension, it works like that. By the way, okay, so now just make sure we have selected all the right things. First object is cube 005 and second object is cube, which is the axle. Okay, so if we press play now, it should, whoa. Okay, so select the car body and do the origin to geometry thing. Add a rigid body, turn this up to about 10 and press play. Save the car, quick save, Command S or Control S, whatever, and play. As you can see, the suspension is actually doing its job. Now select that constraint we just made, press Shift D, move it along the y-axis, just keep it in the middle of the car, and press Shift S2 on the back axle and select the constraint and press Shift S8. Okay. Change the second object to the back axle, which is cube 004, and now if you quick save and play, you should see the car bouncing around a bit. By the way, quick saving won't take more space than it needs to. It just sort of saves the progress, and if you don't do that, well, at one point Blender is gonna crash, and it's gone. It's gone. If you're lucky, there might be an autosave at the right point, but most likely I would say the answer is no. Yes, if you play it right now, it should do that. Yes, it works. I can't believe it. Okay, let's not get too excited here. You know what I mean? Just don't jinx it. Okay, now select the steering control arm thing and don't. Press Shift S2 and add a cylinder. This is gonna be our wheel, and it looks very small right now. So size it down on the x-axis after turning it 90 degrees to the right on the y-axis. Move it to the right, and it should look like that. And then press S and Shift X to size it up, and then press S and X, and then move it on the x-axis again, so that it sort of stays there. Yeah, there's about right. And okay, so that's about it for the first wheel. And then we add rigid body, of course. We can't forget that. I mean, couldn't be me. Press Shift D and ESC so that it stays in place. And then in the location settings, add a minus, and it should go to the other side. Select both the wheels and never mind. copy the location of the back axle, the Y location, press Shift D so that there's a duplicate of the wheel, and Command or Control V into the Y location, and then select the other wheel and just basically do the same. So now we have 4 wheels, but that's not really enough. Okay, so I think that looks good for a crawler. If you're doing, then again, if you're doing it accurate to an actual 3D model, I would suggest you actually model everything, including the wheelbase, the axles, and the actual car body, according to the actual like the real car model, which you want it to look like. I shall make a second part showing you how to actually, make it along with an actual body. It's gonna be really short, but it's basically just exactly what you need to know. Okay, so now if we play, nothing's gonna happen because everything is gonna fall apart. Go into tab in one of the wheels, press Shift S2, and then you know what Shift S2 is by now, right? Please tell me you do. Okay, and add a plane axis. Then again, it can be whatever the hell you like. I just like keeping organized with the actual constraints. And then add a rigid body constraint as useful, and the hinge. The hinge, I like to select the hinge because it's a lot more simpler, and select the first object as this thing, the steering connector, and select the second object as the wheel. Now press R, Y, and 90. So now it should work correctly. And just select mesh on the car because we want it to be the actual shape and not just a convex hull. Now select the empty that we just added, press Shift D, and do that thing again where you move to the opposite side. Then change the second object to the other cylinder, which is the other wheel. So now, as you can see, it stays on correctly. Now it should be connected and the wheel should be oh right, change the first object from cube 001 to the steering arm. Sorry, I connected it to the other steering arm or just forgot to do it in general. Okay, so now it should work right. As you can see, it is working right, and there's a little bit of steering happening. But yeah, as you can see, the steering works. This is why I told you to ignore it in the first place. So now select our don't select the car, select the suspension constraints, and make sure to keep this organized, by the way, because I'm not very good at keeping organized with stuff. So keep this organized, and if we go down to the Y angle here, which is what twists the car, we need to turn it up a lot. I just doubled it. I usually just double it until I get a good answer, sort of feedback, which is what we have right now. So this is the problem here. The wheels turn way too much. So the way to fix that is if we go to steering constraint, enable the Z angle, which is basically disabling it, and change this to -35 and just 35 on the upper one, and do the same to the other one as well. So now it shouldn't be spinning all the way to the right. As you can see, it only spins so much, which is exactly what we wanted. Okay, so we have the suspension setup. By the way, this is not going to be the final suspension by any means. It's not going to look this weird. The damping needs to be adjusted and stuff. There's of course a lot of tweaking that goes into these two specifically, because you need to adjust the stiffness a lot. Trust me. So we have the suspension set up by now, and it's working great. The first time I tried this, it was not working at all. So we're off to a good start here. So now that we have the suspension system, what we need to do now is slightly more complex. We're adding the motor constraints and the drivers. If you don't know what drivers are, they're basically what the name suggests, but not literally. It kind of drives information around. So if you add a driver to the motor, you can sort of link it to the motion of an object. I'll show you what I mean. You'll see. Okay, so add an arrow and make it a motor constraint. Make sure to press Shift S2 on the wheel, whatever wheel you're doing it first, and select the whatever object the wheel is connected to, and then the wheel. The settings are gonna be pretty similar to the actual wheel constraint. So now select this and select the axle and then the wheel, and enable angular, and turn this up a lot. So there's a little bit of explaining to do on this part. So target velocity is like the speed. Turn it up as much as you want. And this is the torque. This is the amount of power that goes into reaching that speed. So now if we play it, it should be... the hell? We should turn it up to something like 60 and turn the speed down to about 10. Which means it's going to be moving very slowly, but surely. Oh, I see the problem. It's moving backwards, so change that to -10, and now it should be moving forward, pushing the entire car forward. As you can see, this is very slow. That's because we set it to 10. You can obviously turn that up, and we're going to be making a control system. Now that we have one motor set, press Shift E and just press ESC and leave it there. And then select the front wheel, Shift S2, and select one of the empties and press Shift S8. Now, this is the important part. Don't mess this up, please. No. Select the steering control thingy and then the wheel, and now the front right should be spinning as well. Yes, it is spinning. And you should have all four wheels turning simultaneously. And this is what we were going for. But no, we're not going to stop there. We need to control the car in real time like I showed in the original test video. So we need to add a driver. What a driver does is it essentially ties it to another value, which is going to be the movement of an object for us. So if you move into the corner here where there's a little gray gap and click and drag, it should do this thing, and we should have another section. Now change the pill thingy to 3D viewport, zoom out a lot, and then go to the far side here and just zoom in there. We're gonna be adding a control panel. So similar to what we did with the tank, but ever so slightly different. So press Shift D on one of these cubes and move it along the axis until you see it there, which I just did. There it is. So now move it so that it's about at the okay, then press N and set the Y location to 0, because the Y location is very important. That's what the driver is going to be tied to. So select the motor we just added the driver on, which is the back left. Edit the driver. You might want to rename the object to steering controller. So select the motor again and go to the edit driver and select the steering controller. Change the X location to Y location and leave it in local space, and turn it into minus variable. So now it should be 0, and if we move this, you can see changes here. Press N and disable lock X and Z on the location, and now you should only be able to move it on the Y axis, and press Alt G. Now it's gonna reset to it's only gonna reset the Y axis. So now if we press play, as you can see, this wheel stays stationary, and if we move it backwards, it's going to spin. So select that motor, right click the driver and click copy driver. Select all the other motors and press paste driver. Okay, so now all the wheels should be controlled by this cube, which is exactly what we want because we need to be able to control the car. So this is actually the throttle controller. Don't worry, changing the name is not gonna affect any of the drivers, so if you play right now, it's just gonna do its thing. By the way, before you play, just select one of the rigid body objects, size it up, and press ESC. And then press play, and it should be reset. Okay, so let's add a steering control by pressing Shift D and then just moving it on the Y-axis. Disable all the locks and then drag it here, move down on the Y-axis and change the Y-axis to 0 and press Control A. This applies the location, applies whatever you select. So we're gonna select location. That's gonna bring the origin point back to the center. Don't worry about that. That's not gonna mess us up. Thankfully. Okay, so now we have our steering object. So rename it to steering, and this time it's actually going to be the steering object and not the throttle. Sadly, for the steering object, we cannot simply just add a driver and sort things out. We have to press Shift D on one of these constraints at the front, the ones that are connecting the steering control object to the control arm, and we're going to have to turn this from generic to motor. This is gonna be quite confusing at first, but trust me, you can get through this. I've done this before, and it's quite easy once you get the hang of it. In the target velocity section, click add driver, just leave it there, add driver, and set this to VAR star 60, or asterisk, whatever you like to call it. The asterisk means multiply by, so it's variable, which is going to be the X location, times 60. Trust me, you're going to need that. The 60 number is what the sensitivity is. If you tone that down, it's going to be less sensitive. Change the world space to a local space as usual, and oh no. So as you can see, that's quite messed up. If you select the motor again, it's minus 88, which is not what we want. That's because we moved it on the x-axis again, and we're going to have to press Control A and location, so that's about its default location. So now go to the N menu and disable the Y and the Z. We should only be able to move it on the X, and likewise, this one should only be able to move on the Y. So select the motor again, and you should see that it has returned to 0. Just press Shift plus 1, and the 3D cursor should be in the middle again. Add an empty and select sphere this time, because we want to be able to see this one. It's quite important. Okay, so now edit the driver on the second one and change this to distance. The first object should be our steering object. Select this and change it to steering power control, maybe? I don't know, it doesn't really matter anyways. So then select the motor and edit driver and select steering power control. Once you've done that, change this from world space to transparent space. Change this from world space to local space. This is important. So now if we quick save and press play, we should be able to move the car. But if you select this and press X twice, it's pointing here, which is not what we want. So select the motor and press RY90. What this does is it faces the local X axis upwards. So basically it's a hinge now. And now if problem solved. So now it should turn. Yes, it is turning. But there's a problem. If you press Alt G, it doesn't return back to its original position. This can be fixed surprisingly easily. Go to the constraint that's connecting the steering system, basically the steering control thingy and the axle together, and change this from generic to generic spring. Scroll all the way down, actually no, go back up, and enable Z angle. What this does is basically adds stiffness, makes it go back to its original position. So turn this up to 1000 and change this to, I prefer 50, I guess, but you're gonna have to adjust the stiffness. You're gonna have to adjust everything in this about this rig once you're testing, because everyone's rig has sometimes different dynamics. So as you can see, it's very, very wobbly, which means we should be turning up the damping. Damping is sort of absorption of the wobbliness. It should work now. Quick save. And yes, it's not as wobbly. So, but before we move on, we need to select this and shift select that, both the suspension links, and go down and turn the damping up to 80 as well. Press Alt Enter so that it applies to both of them, and turn this up to about 3000 and press Alt Enter again. Now it shouldn't be as wobbly when you're turning. As you can see, it's a lot better now, and the car doesn't wobble all the way. Now if we test the steering and the throttle controls, it should work perfectly. I mean, there's a problem though. We have to turn up the surface response to friction up for all of them, just so we get a little bit of grip. Actually, it's like to put it to 0.8, just for the sake of realisticness, if that makes sense. Okay, so instead of working on all of them, just select all two wheels that are left and turn it down to 0.8 and press Alt Enter. Alt Enter basically applies it for all of them. So now we should be able to do some rock crawling. Change this to 1000, go to Rigid Body World, Case, and turn this up to 1000 as well. Every one of these rigs needs a test track. Because suspension isn't always reliable. You should be able to see the car crawl. Sounds very creepy, but it's not, trust me. This is not even a test track, really. This is an example. Feel free to make whatever test track you want, and maybe put an example down in the comments below, and I will shout out the best one in the next part of this, which is going to be a much more advanced tutorial. So make a map, send it to me, and yes, shout out. So thanks for watching. This was really, really painful to make because there was a lot of confusion, and I've been sitting in front of the computer for 2 to 3 hours. So see you in the next one. Subscribe.